Welcome back, and thank you for joining us once again. Tonight, we uncover the story of a man many people thought was mad, not because he had lost his mind, but because he dared to challenge a system everyone else accepted. His name was Philippe Pinel. And what he did would change the future of mental health care forever. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more forgotten stories from history. In the late 18th century, mental illness was one of the least understood conditions in the world. There were no modern psychiatric hospitals. No antidepressants. No psychological therapies. No scientific understanding of many disorders that affect millions today. Instead, fear dominated public attitudes. People experiencing severe mental distress were often viewed as possessed, morally corrupt, dangerous, or permanently broken. Families frequently hid relatives away from public view. And institutions built to house the mentally ill often resembled prisons more than hospitals. Philippe Pinel was born in 1745 in southern France. At first, nothing about his life suggested he would change medical history. He studied medicine during a period when scientific thinking was beginning to challenge centuries of superstition. Across Europe, philosophers and scholars promoted reason, evidence, and human dignity. These ideas became known as the Enlightenment. Pinel absorbed those ideas deeply. He believed medicine should be guided by observation rather than fear. Compassion rather than cruelty. Evidence rather than tradition. At the time, such views were far from universal. Especially when it came to mental illness. During his early medical career, Pinel witnessed something that affected him profoundly. A close friend reportedly experienced severe mental distress and later died under tragic circumstances. The event strengthened Pinel's interest in understanding mental disorders. Why did some people lose touch with reality? Why did emotional suffering affect different people differently? Why were patients treated as if recovery were impossible? These questions followed him throughout his career. And eventually, they led him to one of the most infamous institutions in France. In 1793, during the chaos of the French Revolution, Pinel became chief physician at the Bicêtre Hospital near Paris. Calling Bicêtre a hospital barely described the reality. It housed a mixture of patients including the mentally ill, prisoners, poor residents, and others society considered unwanted. Conditions were harsh. Many psychiatric patients were chained to walls or confined in tiny spaces. Some had spent decades in confinement. The prevailing belief was simple. People with severe mental illness could not be reasoned with. Could not improve. Could not recover. The chains were considered necessary. Pinel disagreed. One story would later become famous throughout the world. According to popular accounts, Pinel requested permission to remove the chains from certain patients. Officials reportedly warned him that doing so would be dangerous. The patients might attack staff. Escape. Cause chaos. Some accounts claim Pinel's colleagues believed he was risking his own life. Whether every detail of the story unfolded exactly as later artists depicted remains debated among historians. The famous paintings showing Pinel dramatically striking chains from patients were created years afterward and likely romanticized the event. But historians agree on the essential truth. Pinel advocated removing physical restraints from many patients and replacing brutality with humane treatment. That change was revolutionary. Imagine the scene. Patients who had lived in chains for years suddenly finding themselves free to walk. To speak. To interact with others. To experience sunlight. To be treated not as monsters but as human beings. Many observers expected disaster. Instead, something remarkable happened. The feared wave of violence largely failed to appear. Some patients became calmer. Others became more cooperative. Many responded positively simply because someone treated them with dignity. For Pinel, the lesson was clear. Mental illness was not evidence of lost humanity. The patient still existed beneath the suffering. Pinel began developing what became known as moral treatment. The term sounds unusual today because the word moral carried a different meaning in this context. It did not mean punishment or moral judgment. Instead, it referred to compassionate, structured care focused on psychological well-being. Pinel encouraged staff to talk with patients. Observe them carefully. Understand their histories. Reduce unnecessary punishment. Create environments that supported recovery whenever possible. These ideas sound obvious now. At the time, they were radical. Rather than viewing all mental illness as identical, Pinel carefully documented different symptoms and behaviors. He observed patterns, recorded case histories, and attempted to classify disorders more systematically. His work helped move psychiatry away from superstition and toward medical observation. The shift was gradual, far from perfect, but important. For perhaps the first time, large numbers of mentally ill patients were being studied as patients rather than curiosities. Pinel's influence expanded further when he later became associated with another major institution, the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. There, he continued implementing reforms and refining his ideas. Thousands of patients passed through these institutions. Many experienced treatment that remained primitive by modern standards. Yet compared to what existed before, the changes were significant. Pinel challenged an entire system built upon fear. And systems rarely change without resistance. Not everyone supported his methods. Some physicians believed kindness was ineffective. Others argued mentally ill patients required strict control. Even among supporters, debates emerged about how much freedom patients should receive. Medicine itself remained limited. Many conditions still lacked effective treatments. Pinel did not solve mental illness. No single person could. But he changed how society thought about it. And sometimes changing perception becomes the first step toward changing reality. One of the most important aspects of Pinel's work was his insistence on observation. Instead of assuming every patient was permanently irrational, he spent time listening, watching, recording, trying to understand. Today, careful observation forms a foundation of psychiatric practice. But during Pinel's era, that approach represented a major departure from established thinking. He encouraged physicians to see individual people rather than categories. Individual histories rather than labels. Human beings rather than problems to hide. As his reputation grew, Pinel published influential writings on mental illness that circulated throughout Europe. Other physicians studied his ideas. Hospitals gradually adopted some of his methods. The movement toward more humane psychiatric care expanded beyond France. Progress remained uneven. There were setbacks, failures, and many future abuses would still occur within psychiatric institutions. History is rarely a straight path. But Pinel helped push it in a new direction. It is important, however, not to turn Philippe Pinel into a flawless hero. Modern historians emphasize that some of his views reflected the limitations of his era. Certain theories he promoted would later prove incorrect. Some practices considered humane in the 18th century would not meet modern ethical standards. Like every historical figure, Pinel was a product of his time. His significance lies not in perfection, but in progress. He moved the conversation forward when many others preferred it remain unchanged. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Pinel's legacy is philosophical rather than medical. He challenged a dangerous assumption. The assumption that suffering strips away a person's humanity. For centuries, society often treated people with mental illness as if they were fundamentally different from everyone else. Pinel argued otherwise. He believed they deserved care, respect, understanding. Not because they had earned it, but because they were human. By the time Philippe Pinel died in 1826, the foundations of psychiatric medicine were beginning to shift. The transformation would take generations. Many breakthroughs still lay far in the future. Sigmund Freud had not yet been born. Modern psychology did not exist. Neuroscience remained decades away. Yet the idea that mentally ill patients deserved humane treatment had gained powerful momentum. And much of that momentum traced back to Pinel's work. Today, mental health care remains an evolving field. Challenges still exist. Misunderstandings remain common. Stigma has not disappeared entirely. But the world is very different from the one Pinel inherited. Hospitals no longer resemble the institutions he entered in 1793. Psychiatric disorders are studied scientifically. Therapies and medications help millions. And conversations about mental health have become increasingly open. None of that happened because of one person alone. But Philippe Pinel helped begin the journey. There is an irony in his story. When Pinel proposed treating psychiatric patients with compassion, many contemporaries considered the idea dangerously unrealistic. Some viewed him as naive. Others thought he had lost touch with reality. In a sense, they believed the doctor was the irrational one. The mad man. Yet history delivered a different verdict. Because the truly radical idea was not freeing the chains. It was believing that the people wearing them still deserved dignity. And that simple belief helped change mental health care forever.